Today, you'll learn English with the news. We'll read a news article together on the war in the Middle East. Welcome back to JForrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started. Our headline, Trump says U.S. will blockade the Strait of Hormuz. So here, notice blockade. This is being used as a verb. You can tell because of the sentence structure. Will blockade. This is what verb tense? The future simple. We have will and then the base verb, blockade. And I'm explaining that because the word blockade is commonly used as a noun. For example, protesters formed a blockade. Now, in this sentence structure, you know that it's a noun because only nouns take articles. Formed a blockade, created a blockade, put up a blockade, and stopped cars from entering the street. Now, a blockade, the noun, or to blockade, this is to block. So to prevent cars or people or goods such as oil, fuel, from entering or leaving a specific location. Now, the verb block has the same meaning, but you might say a tree fell and blocked the road. But a blockade is always done purposely. So to purposely block, to prevent people or things from entering or leaving. So it's usually done for political reasons or strategic reasons. So here's the sentence, the same sentence or similar, using the verb. Protesters tried to blockade the street. So try to block, try to create or form a blockade. And notice the pronunciation of this ending is aid, aid, aid. Now, because of the way the syllables will be divided, it will sound more like blockade. So you'll hear this K sound on the aid. Blockade, blockade, blockade. Don't worry about taking notes. I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF. You can find the link in the description. Now let's keep reading and learn about this blockade. And I just used which form, the noun or the verb? Let's keep reading about this blockade. This, so you know it's a thing, so it's a noun. The verb would be, let's read about how the U.S. is blockading or is trying to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so let's keep reading. After a diplomatic team led by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance tried and failed to reach a negotiated agreement to end the war with Iran on Saturday, President Donald Trump announced plans to block the Strait of Hormuz. Now here, notice they're just using the verb block. Most likely because we already know it is strategic because they used it in the header. So now because we know they're talking strategically, you can just simply use block because like I explained, it has the same meaning, just one is done on purpose and strategically. But you could just add the ADE spelling and the pronunciation blockade and you could just turn it into the verb. And notice the important information here. Donald Trump announced plans to block. So this is just a plan at this point, which makes sense because in the header, we saw it was the future simple, will blockade. But if you present something more as the future simple, it sounds like it's a planned action, will blockade. So this has a slightly different meaning than saying announce plans to blockade, because we all know that plans sometimes don't happen in a political context and in an everyday social context or family context as well. So keep in mind this at this point of the article, it's just a plan. And notice how they added tried and failed to reach a negotiated agreement. Now, the word negotiated is important because it sounds like both parties were involved because the verb is to negotiate. Now, in this sentence structure, what form of word is this? What type of speech is this? Remember, I said it can be used as a verb. And as a verb, this could be the past simple. We negotiated an agreement. But that's not the sentence structure, because when you have it before the noun, it functions as the adjective. And often verbs can become adjectives by adding the ed form. That isn't with every verb though, but that is commonly done. So a negotiated agreement. Let's review this question. How did the negotiations go? This would be a very common question you can ask in a political context. You would commonly ask in a business context, and you can even ask in a family context. Maybe your sister or a friend just went to negotiate a home deal or the purchase of a new car. How did the negotiations go? Now here, negotiations, this is a noun. So is treating negotiating the action as a thing. So the negotiations. Here you can say we negotiated last week, but we couldn't reach an agreement. So negotiate is the verb, is conjugated in the past simple because we have last week. And this is a simple regular verb, so you have ed for the past simple. Negotiated, negotiated. Now, reach an agreement. Reach is the verb that is commonly used with agreement. Because agreement is a noun, you also have the article, an agreement. You could also say we failed to reach a negotiated agreement. So here, negotiated is the adjective. You can tell because of the placement. Like I said, it becomes before the noun. And also notice an agreement, our article becomes a because the spelling changes between and depending on the spelling of the word that immediately follows it, not necessarily the noun. So when you have an article or an adjective directly following the article, that's what you need to base your choice of or an on.
Are you enjoying this lesson? If you are, then I want to tell you about the Finally Fluent Academy. This is my premium training program where we study native English speakers from TV, movies, YouTube, and the news so you can improve your listening skills of fast English, expand your vocabulary with natural expressions, and learn advanced grammar easily. Plus, you'll have me as your personal coach. You can look in the description for the link to learn more, or you can go to my website and click on Finally Fluent Academy. Now let's continue with our lesson.
The U.S. Military Central Command announced that the naval blockade. So here we have the blockade, so it's a noun, and same thing, naval functions as the adjective. It tells you about the blockade. Now, the word naval means relating to the Navy, and the Navy is ships. So the naval blockade, it would be ships that act as a block. Just like if a tree falls and it blocks the road, the tree is the blockade. So in this case, there could be a ship, a Navy or a military ship that blocks other ships. So the naval blockade would stop all ships traveling to or from Iranian ports. Tehran has vowed to retaliate. Okay, so we have very strong wording right here with vowed and retaliate. First, let's review vow. Vow, ow, vow. This is the base verb, to vow. Now, this is in the present perfect because it's a completed past action with the result in the present. That's why the present perfect is being used. And the past simple, you just add a soft D, vowed, vowed. Now, in the verb form, you might say, I vowed to protect my family. If you vow to do something, so you need the infinitive to protect, it means you strongly promise or publicly state. You hear this a lot in movies, in books, and even in everyday speech. Probably the most common usage in everyday speech is your wedding vows. So in North America, a lot of wedding ceremonies, traditional ones, they use this wording, I vow I strongly promise, or I publicly state, I vow to take this man as my husband. I vow to love him in sickness and health until death do us part. Those are the traditional wedding vows, a small part of them. Now, that's the verb, I vow. You can also use it as a noun, a vow. And then wedding vows, that would be a thing. So it's a noun. So you would write your wedding vows, and then maybe you practice your wedding vows, and then you have to share your wedding vows on your wedding day. And as the noun, you can use the verb make. I made a vow. I made a vow to protect my family. So in this case, it is the verb. Tehran has vowed. Tehran has publicly stated or strongly promised to do something, to retaliate against. So the verb is retaliate, retaliate, E8, 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 retaliate. And you retaliate against someone or something. Now, the meaning of to retaliate is, I'm going to do something negative to you. It may hurt you physically, it may hurt you financially, but it's going to hurt you in some way, in a negative way. And I'm only doing it because you first did something to me. So it's like a form of revenge, but to retaliate means you're going to take specific action to hurt someone in an equal way or more extreme way than they hurt you as a form of punishment against that person. And remember, it could be a thing as well. You might retaliate against someone's decision, for example. So then the thing is the decision or the action. And you use the preposition against. Now, in this context, the consequences of retaliation is the noun form. So the consequences of their negative actions of retaliation could be quite severe, of course. But although the action is always negative, it could be just a less severe negative action. Maybe, for example, the team retaliated, that's the verb, in the past simple, the team retaliated after their star player was pushed. So in hockey, if one player pushes the other player, well, that other player is probably going to push the other player. So yes, it's a negative action, but the consequences are less severe. Now, hopefully there's a voice of reason in everyday situations, and someone says, don't retaliate, you'll only make things worse. And using the noun, I might say your retaliation, viewing your negative action as a thing, your retaliation will only make things worse. And that's the noun. So Tehran has vowed to retaliate. Remember, if you include the someone or something, you need against. In my example, the team retaliated against the other team. It's not always required that you need to include the someone or something. So in this sentence, it's not required because it sounds obvious based on context, but you can absolutely include it. Just remember the preposition is against. Tehran has vowed to retaliate against any military vessels in the strait. So a vessel is another word for ship, but a vessel could be any style of ship because there may be very specific names other than just ship. Military vessels in the strait. Iran is not a place that can be contained with tweets and imaginary blockade plans. So remember, in the headline, it was presented as the future simple. The U.S. will blockade. And then later on, we saw it was just announced plans to blockade or block. So that plan, Iran is suggesting, was just made with a tweet on social media. So Iran is not a place that can be contained with tweets and imaginary blockade plans. So this is basically Iran saying that this may not happen, or your threat to blockade us isn't going to prevent us, the government added. A narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman has once again become the center of global economic anxiety. So that narrow strip of water is the Strait of Hormuz. So here they use the name instead of describing it as a narrow strip of water. Often articles will do this just so they don't have to repeat the same thing again and again and again. They try to think of other ways of describing it. So a narrow strip of water. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy choke points, is facing fresh disruption risks. So the disruption risk is if there were a blockade, that would completely disrupt. So disruption is the noun form of to disrupt. And then a risk is something that may happen, a negative that may happen. Because remember, this is, at this point of the recording, this is a plan to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Is facing fresh disruption risks as tensions escalate. So escalate is another way of saying a rise or increase, and is commonly used with a conflict or a fight, a disagreement, which you could use the noun tension. So tension describes when people are fighting, that uncomfortable feeling that's in the air, that's obvious, is tension. So there was a lot of tension between us at the meeting. So you can see the tension visibly, you can sense the tension if that's something that you're susceptible to, feeling other people's emotions, which I am. I can sense tension when I walk into a room. As tensions escalate between Iran on one side and the United States and Israel on the other. So on one side, on the other, they're talking about, well, two sides of any issue, any conflict, any debate, any dispute. Now let's go back and review choke point, because I realized I didn't explain that. So the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy choke points. So a choke point is a point in a system, a process, or a physical location where the flow can be slowed. Now in transportation, it may be simply because something wide becomes narrow before it becomes wide again, and that narrow point is a choke point. So you might say, don't take that route. The bridge is a choke point. So you have 4-lane highway, but then it all goes into this narrow bridge and then it opens up again. So that's physical, a physical choke point. It could also be more metaphorical. For example, you might say that question on our survey is a choke point. You have 10 questions on a survey, but every time people get to number 4, sometimes they don't like the question and they leave, they refuse to answer the rest of the survey, or answering question 4 just takes a really long time, or it's complicated, just something about question 4. Question 1, 2, 3, everything's fine, but then 4, everything slows. So question 4 is a choke point. Let's keep reading. This situation has raised alarm across energy markets, governments, and investors because of the strait's outsized role in global oil and gas trade. So the situation being the proposed plan to blockade the strait. So that situation has raised alarm. So this is the verb that you can use with alarm, which means to cause alarm to happen. An alarm not necessarily meaning meh, meh, meh at 6 a.m., just concern, has raised concern. has raised alarm across energy markets, governments, and investors. So they're talking about different groups of people, not just political, because of the strait's outsized role in global oil and gas trade. So if it has an outsized role, it means it's a way bigger role than you would expect given maybe the size of the strait because it's tiny, or the location, or whatever reason, but larger than one would expect is outsized role. Oil topped $100 a barrel again on Sunday. So 100, no S on 100, but you add the S to dollars. And the money sign comes first in North American spelling convention, but in pronunciation, it comes after. So oil topped $100 a barrel. Now, a means per barrel. So you have one barrel. That's what it means. One barrel. A barrel per barrel. The verb top means reach or exceed. It's not clear. So it could be that oil was $100 per barrel, or oil was $105 per barrel, because it's reach or exceed. So you might say the temperature will top 30 degrees today. So 30, but it could be 31, 33. So it's commonly used with prices, even though it's not a specific reference, and is commonly used with temperatures, or you can use it with any quantity. Oil topped $100 a barrel again on Sunday. So again, meaning it's happened in the past, as the blockade threatens to further disrupt the global economy. So they're saying the price of oil increased to or above $100 because of the news of the blockade. So in this case, as means because. As the blockade threatens to further disrupt, so further meaning there's already disruption. Disruption is the noun form. Disrupt is the verb form. But further disrupt, if you further disrupt, there has to already be disruption. So if you're asking me questions in a class and then nobody has their hand up, I might say, are there any further questions? Meaning any more questions. But at the very beginning, I would just say, are there any questions? Because nobody has asked a question. So you only use further if that action has already been done in whatever context. So very common. Any further questions, any further concerns, any further information you would like, very commonly used. To further disrupt the global economy and keep gas prices elevated. So elevated means higher than normal. The conflict has become a test of wills, of Iran's ability to endure continued US and Israeli attacks versus Trump's tolerance for the economic and political pain the war has produced. So in this context, wills represents willpower, your strength, your internal strength, your ability to endure. So that's what we have here, ability to endure. Now, you endure something negative. You don't endure watching Netflix and eating chips. That's easy. So you need willpower to endure running a marathon, for example, or you need willpower to endure learning a second language. Absolutely. So the expression together, a test of wills, you might think it as determination versus determination. So my determination, meaning my willpower, my motivation, my ability to endure, versus your willpower, motivation, ability to endure. So, if there's a test of wills, who's going to win? I don't know. I have a pretty strong will. What about you? Hopefully you do as well, because you need it when you're learning a second language, that's for sure. And that's the end of the article. So what I'll do now is I'll read the article from start to finish, and you can focus on my pronunciation. Trump says U.S. will blockade the Strait of Hormuz. After a diplomatic team led by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance tried and failed to reach a negotiated agreement to end the war with Iran, on Saturday, President Donald Trump announced plans to block the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. Military Central Command announced that the naval blockade would stop all ships traveling to or from Iranian ports. Tehran has vowed to retaliate against any military vessels in the strait. Iran is not a place that can be contained with tweets and imaginary blockade plans, the government added. A narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman has once again become the center of global economic anxiety. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy choke points, is facing fresh disruption risks as tensions escalate between Iran on one side and the United States and Israel on the other. The situation has raised alarm across energy markets, governments, and investors because of the strait's outsized role in global oil and gas trade. Oil topped $100 a barrel again on Sunday as the blockade threatens to further disrupt the global economy and keep gas prices elevated. The conflict has become a test of wills, of Iran's ability to endure continued U.S. and Israeli attacks versus Trump's tolerance for the economic and political pain the war has produced.
Do you want to keep learning English with the news? If you do, put let's go, put let's go in the comments. And of course, make sure you like this lesson, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And here's another lesson I know you'll love. Watch it now.